Well, welcome everyone, those of you who are watching on YouTube or those of you who will be joining us here in a little bit. My name is Gareth Jones. I am the Assistant Director in the Office of Service Learning and Undergraduate Research. COVID brain there, sorry about that. And you are here for a great presentation from two wonderful collaborators. This whole semester we've been presenting on developing research skills. So these are skill sets that are for things that you can develop once you've already started research. Of course, if you haven't started research, that's totally fine. You can still be here. Today's topic is timely no matter what stage of your academic career you are in. It is applicable and valuable. We collaborated with the Merit Scholars, and Dr. Melissa Labonte connected me with the wonderful Keegan and Hailey Levi, who are going to be presenting today. And we got together and came up with some great ideas of things that we thought undergraduates could really benefit from. And this is a brand new one, so I'm super excited to see it presented and give students at UAB an opportunity to find out about all the different types of ways to get funded to do your research, whether as an undergrad or after your undergrad career. So without further ado, I'm going to now hand over the time to Keegan and Hailey, and they're going to tell you all about funding. Thanks again.
Thank you, Gareth. Hello, everybody. This is going to be our presentation on, we know you guys are doing research now, or maybe you're not, but we're like, okay, cool, you're doing research. Now, how do you get funded and where to find it? Because some people might be doing volunteer research, might be doing class hours, but like getting paid is really nice. So this is just a few different sources that we have gathered. Keegan and I and the rest of the team have gathered to show you guys.
Yeah, thanks for that. Today's talk is going to be a short and sweet one. We want to get the funding to you as fast as we could, so hope you enjoy it. So to start things off, we do need to cover what scientific funding is. This is something that unfortunately kind of gets glossed over in undergraduate courses, but it is useful to understand just so when you're applying to these things, you know what you're applying for. So to start things off, just a brief history of scientific funding. So initially, scientific funding meant private patronage or monetary support from the church, or being rich enough to fund it yourself. For example, wealthy individuals in the Catholic Church funded Galileo's work in the 16th and 17th centuries, but already by the 19th century, Darwin's famous voyage was funded by the British government. And so this shift from private to more public forward-facing funding came alongside a change in our belief in what science should be. And this change in belief was, it had the groundwork laid by Francis Bacon's ideas on scientific institutionalization and the scientific revolution broadly. And this led to the creation of scientific societies. I'm sure you've heard of some of them when reading textbooks. The first one was the Royal Society of London, and that was in the 17th century, the 1660s. And so with public and research-oriented funding came the belief that science should benefit society as a whole, as well as it allowed for a greater ability for researchers to pursue truth rather than profitability when deciding upon research questions. So previously, a lot of researchers and scientists were really aristocrats who were rich enough to fund their own side interests, as well as they were the ones who were educated. But oftentimes these interests had to pay for themselves, so to speak. So it was more so about invention rather than finding fundamental truths of the universe. And public funding of research would become widespread in the 20th century and still is today. So modern research funding, there's a multitude of funding agencies, and they do fall into private and public categories. And so for private funding, you have private companies. Think of Honda, think of oil companies, like they're always wanting to stimulate research because it'll pay dividends for them down the line. There's also foundations and endowments such as the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, professional organizations such as the American Cancer Society, as well as more rarely, though sometimes a bit more common in conservation or ecology efforts, is crowdfunding or citizen-led science. And then for public funding institutions, these are various government research councils, and in the US we have the NSF, the NIH, DARPA, the Office of Science, which is through the Department of Energy, And these have a lot of federal funds that they can put towards research. So there are different types of scientific funding, and it's really important to know what types, because you're going to hear these words thrown out and people are never going to explain it. So here's the explanation. So scholarships and fellowships, these are given to individuals. Sometimes it's specifically for research, sometimes it's for training and career development. A rough rule is that scholarships are for students and fellowships are for staff, but these categories are really fuzzy, but some people do use them that way. And it should be noted that conference and travel grants are available to fund opportunities to share your science. Then there's seed funding, which is short-term grants typically given to fund untested ideas or methodologies. Funding agencies will typically give these out for much more experimental, high risk, high reward type of research, whereas universities will often commonly provide seed funding to their professors because they know it's guaranteed to bring them dividends down the line. And then you have what is maybe the most common type of funding when you hear the word grant, project funding. And so these are grants given to broader research teams or specific professors that lead research teams. And it's for a single project that's meant to be research for an extended period of time, often a year or a couple of years. Then is kind of like a bigger type of project funding. You have center funding, and this is grants given to a program of work that includes multiple projects. These are often collaborative cores at universities encompassing multiple different lab environments coming together. And these are longer term, like 3 to 6 years on average, sometimes even close to 10 years. And then you have prizes and awards. These are given based upon past work. That's what separates them from the others. The other types are given based on future work, whereas prizes and awards are given based on past work for recognition and reinvestment. And they are typically very competitive. To get one looks great on a CV. Sometimes there's not even a monetary component at all. It's all just for recognition and like CV boosting. And so one thing we do want to keep in mind is funding bias. And so funding is obviously necessary for research, but anytime you're funding anything, it does bring with it some incentives that can distort the results. And so funding bias is a two-way street that has effects on both who gets the funding and the work that funded scientists then submit. So funding agencies have a variety of biases they sometimes follow when awarding funds. These include a bias towards applied or human-focused science, a bias towards trendy research topics, and these aren't altogether bad. It makes sense why these biases exist. Human-focused science, well, it's humans doing the science, and we are, for better or for worse, self-interested. And then with trendy research topics, that bias does often drive research, new, innovative, and novel research, but at times it does lead to a stronger overrepresentation of new and untested ideas that get more proportions of the funding than they deserve, and it kind of it distorts where the research heads oftentimes before the research is really ready to head that direction. And then the other side of the street is that scientists that are looking to receive or continue receiving funds can often feel pressure to tailor their research to specific funding agencies' interests in a sometimes damaging way. A 2005 study in Nature found that 15.5% of questioned NIH-funded scientists admitted to altering design, methodology, or reports of their studies due to pressure of an external funding source. And so this is obviously bad. One of the central tenets of science is neutrality, and these biases lead to things we see where oil companies can pay for research that expresses their interest, but don't actually express the truth of the matter. And one thing I want to make sure is noted is that funding bias is separate, though sometimes connected to publication biases, which occurs in journals. So now we get to the exciting bit, where to find scientific funding as an undergrad. If you're here, I imagine this section is why you're here, and I hope it doesn't disappoint. So first things first, taking the first step for research. I'm sure some of you all are already at research labs. Some of you all might not be and might just be interested, and that's totally fine. So there are a huge amount of funding opportunities meant for undergraduate researchers, and they are worth looking into, but we really want to make sure that those options don't scare you. Because looking at these funding opportunities before you have research experience is great, but not at all necessary. PIs will often have room in their lab for you to volunteer there, and then once you're trained, maybe join the lab more full-time, as well as they'll often have specific undergraduate funding resources in mind that you can apply for once you become a member of their lab, as well as like getting your foot in the door and starting to get research experience will just help you apply for more undergraduate research funding opportunities in the future. So it really pays for itself. So external undergraduate funding opportunities, these are both national and international, and any student in the US will be able to benefit from these links. And so first off, we have the NSF Special Programs for Undergraduate Students. This is just a large aggregate of links. It's super useful. Definitely check it out. And next, we have National Research Mentoring Network. They do a lot of good work, and they also have like a lot of resources just on that first page with opportunities for getting funded, including for diversity funding, which if you are a minority, you should absolutely look into. You can talk to your mentor about that if you've already joined a lab. And this secondary link, the National Research Mentoring Network Academic Resources, I really love this link. It has resources for helping you, articles that can help you find a mentor. It discusses what it means to be an undergraduate research and do good science. These are just really good resources that can't hurt to check out. And then we have REUs, Research Experiences for Undergrads. These are competitive summer research programs in the United States. I did one of these when I was an undergrad, and I would highly recommend them. They're sponsored by the NSF, and this link is an NSF-hosted search function for looking all throughout the country for REUs. They're really good, and if you have like a free summer, you should absolutely apply. And then we have professional societies, and so this is one reason why professors will often urge students to get involved in professional societies early, is because they can offer funding opportunities such as Developmental Biology's Choose Development, which has 2 years of support for students, including 2 paid summer research opportunities. There's the link. Some journals will also sponsor undergraduate research grant programs. I know that ACS does. It's really a case-by-case basis. I'm sure if you're looking at journals that you're doing research for, you'll see it if they have it, but you might want to check that out. And then these last 2 links are awards and opportunities recommended by UCR, but they're available to students all across the nation, and they're highly recommended. And here we have UAB-specific undergraduate funding opportunities. These are great for anyone watching this who is a UAB student. You should absolutely check out these links. So this first link should be your first stop. It can help you with everything. It has resources for finding specifically a mentor at UAB, specific UAB summer programs, as well as a whole slew of publication and presentation opportunities. And that's one thing, is that there are publication opportunities that are specifically available to undergraduates that sometimes are a bit easier to get published in, but can be very good for your CV and then getting into grad school. And they also have the Matching Travel Grants Program, which can directly support undergraduate students travel to conferences or competitions to share your research. And we absolutely advise you try to do stuff like this. Conferences are an integral part of science. They're also a really fun part of science, and they look great on CVs. Absolutely go to conferences if you can. And if you're part of a lab, you should definitely be talking to your mentor about potential conferences. This next link, UAB Medicine Undergraduate Research, this is another just huge list of resources that are available to undergraduate students at UAB, but it is medicine focused, so I would only check that out if that's kind of your wheelhouse. SIBS is a summer program here for undergraduates. Definitely check it out if you have a free summer. And then if you have 1 semester of research experience and GPA of 3.5, you should check out the Beckman Scholars Program. I've heard it's really good. And last but certainly not least, you should reach out to UAB's wonderful research ambassadors and our co-director of the Office of Service Learning and Undergraduate Research, Gareth Jones. he is wonderful and can help you with anything you need. And if you have any questions, free to ask. Thanks. Good luck.
All right. Well, thank you, Keegan. I actually have a question.
Yeah, sure thing.
And Hailey, thank you to both of you. So I recently had a student ask me a question that I unfortunately did not have a perfect answer to. I tried to kind of cobble things together, but the student was applying to an NSF REU. And as part of that application, they said, what internal funding do you have to help support this application? So she was asking me if UAB had any internal funding to help students who are doing summer research programs. And of course, we have our own summer research programs. And we have the travel grant, but that's really for conferences. We have a mini grant where a mentor can apply for that money to help support a student. But I was not aware of any UAB specific internal money that could be used to help a student kind of fund a summer program, because summer programs, you get a stipend to be there, and they take care of your room and board and things like that. But they don't, some of them will pay for your flight, but not all of them will. And so I think she was hoping to kind of, find funding for things like that, like the flight out there, that type of thing. Are you aware of any of those, or maybe when you applied, were you required to provide that information?
Yeah, so typically with those sections, what it's mainly trying to hone in on is, are you part of a lab that is going to sponsor you? And so if you are part of a lab, that would obviously be a conversation with your mentor. If you aren't part of a lab, or if your mentor doesn't have any funding available specifically for the REU, that isn't a problem. You should absolutely still apply. It also wouldn't hurt to go ahead and shoot a quick question to maybe your dean and program coordinator. They might have some specific UAB sponsorship resources they could get you in touch with.
I've never been asked that question before, but that's a really good question.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep digging, and it's something. And Keegan, that was a great answer, because and unfortunately she didn't have a mentor that had money to help fund it. Some mentors absolutely, that should be part of their process with you, but unfortunately she wasn't in that category. But it's definitely something that I'm gonna keep investigating, and I'm going to ask other institutions as well whether they have any kind of internal programs like that that are more open to help support those summer programs. Go ahead.
One quick thing. Another way that question can kind of go down is if the REU is at a different university, but you have been talking to a professor at that university that's interested in having over the summer, then their internal funding would be your internal funding for the course of the REU over the summer. So that's another thing to keep in mind.
Excellent.
Also, if either of the PIs can, if you know early enough in time, so on if you have any PI that has an NIH grant, and your student just so happens to be a minority according to NIH, how they qualify what a minority is.
Yeah.
PIs are allowed to apply for diversity supplemental funding. So if you are a minority student, typically Black, African American, Hispanic, female, you come from disability, you come from a very, very small town, they can apply for this funding and get potential funding for you, and it works as an undergrad, grad student, and a postdoc. So they can also ask their either the PIs if they have that. I know sometimes you'll have to know early enough ahead of time in order to get the money and apply, and then they have to also do a side project for it, because you can't be double funded in the lab for the same project. But that could work too. You can pretty much use the money on anything. Some people use it for traveling to conferences. Some people use it for graduate stipends. Some people use it for buying lab material for that specific project. So it just depends on what they want to do. You would just have to ask them very far ahead of time. I'm talking fall, end of fallish at the latest.
Gotcha. Excellent. Yeah, it takes a good point. Yes, Neela.
Just one thing. I know that at least with the neuroscience major here at UAB, they have an internal scholarship program that would give you a little money for research, so a little bit of funding for research. So there might be a few majors at UAB that might have internal funding that you could use.
Excellent. No, those are all great suggestions, and I also, and I think you mentioned it, the societies and honor societies and all of those things like that. I know that UAB has several of those that are STEM based um, as well as engineering, that those groups have funding as well to help with things like that. So, all right, excellent. I was just trying to think, Nilu, do you have any other questions that you have for this group?
Yeah, I have a few. So one question I had is, you talked a little bit about some of the problems with the current system of funding. I was just wondering what you thought needed to be changed to, like, promote research in general instead of promoting production of certain results.
Yeah, that's a really hard one. A lot of it has to do with like cultural changes, as well as like, I think, informing students from the ground up that are becoming researchers of these things, because oftentimes we're not even teaching them that these problems really exist or anything like that, which is knowing the problem exists is like step one for fixing it. But really for that specific problem, I think it comes down to having the right people in charge of these funding agencies. There could be solutions such as expanding the councils that make funding decisions, but in general, because these are disconnected and like some are private, some are public, they all have their own systems. It really comes down to just who's in charge and who's making those decisions.
Another question I had was, you talked about how if we're interested in joining a lab, but there isn't a position open yet, then we should start by volunteering and then getting into a position. I was wondering, how long do you think we should be in a lab as a volunteer before we talk to our PI about working in the lab in either like a paid position or an unpaid position?
Something that it can be awkward and kind of tough to bring up ahead of time, but it is really good to kind of get a rough idea of expectations from the start. Oftentimes, if you bring up like, oh, I want to start on a training basis, but I'd like to eventually like transfer to a more like part-time paid position within the lab, then sometimes they can have a conversation with you about like, well, after you've gone through training, because a big thing is you'll pretty much never start a lab as an undergraduate getting paid, because there's training and they don't know if they'll keep you through training and stuff like that. But setting those expectations or trying to set them early can help. If you don't bring it up at first, I would say like maybe after like 3 to 6 months, especially like if you're starting to like lead your own experiments or even like your own mini projects, that'd be the time to bring it up.
I also have to agree, when I started out as an undergrad researcher, mine was on a volunteer basis. And I was like volunteering, and then I got put on class credits. So because we knew that, at least at my undergraduate institution, if you get class credit for research, it also counts for like a part of your like degree unit count that you needed. So I was like, okay, well, taking away classes I didn't want to take. So that's how I kind of did it. And then also, as I was actively doing this, I had heard about funding as an undergraduate and was actively applying towards scholarships and stuff. My PI ended up not having to fund me because I found funding myself. But I think also showing initiative and saying like you want to be paid and funded for research and stuff is a great way to also leeway into that conversation. Just saying that like, oh, I've been looking at funding sources, haven't gotten any of them, but I'm looking and I was wondering. And then also it can open up a bunch of doors too, where it's like, well, if this person can't do it, what about going to do this one or this one or this one? So yeah.
Yeah, and if you're nervous to bring that up with your PI, a really easy neutral way to bring it up is don't mention you getting paid. Just say like, Also, in the future, I'd love to get funded. Do you have any recommendations about funding opportunities? And that's a really easy, low stress way to bring it up for both parties.
I was just going to say another way to know kind of in advance is that on Scholars at UAB, you can see what kind of funding different researchers have, and you can actually go and look at the funding that they have. And very often, if they're very well funded, it's probably an easier conversation versus someone who may not be getting big NSF or NIH money and just doing the research on their own. That's more likely to be a volunteer situation versus some of these big labs that have some substantial grant money that is designated to have undergraduates even in that plan. So sometimes you can see that when you look at their funding organization. I would also add that very often students talk to me about looking at the paid job handshake that we have here at UAB for research positions. And I always caution students that those can be very good to get basic research skills. And if you need to be paid to get that done, great, you can do that. But those don't always lead to what I call deep research experiences because they are hiring you really just for one specific thing to do, that may be washing glassware or data entry or something like that. And it can lead to more, but it doesn't always lead to more. So I think, it's good to know when you apply for those through Handshake, through those paid positions, that you need to also have that same type of conversation, like, will this lead to a deeper research experience, or are you hiring me just to do the basics? So that's another thing that I caution students on quite a bit. So any other questions, Neela? Those are some really good ones.
So actually, one thing that's a part of the previous question, when you go to API about funding or about getting paid, what are certain things you should keep in mind? Like, what are certain things you should be talking about or discussing with your PI when you talk about that?
I would keep in mind that getting funded and them paying you for your work is really a sign that you're a contributing member of the lab. And so the expectation there is that you're going to contribute to the research and you're going to probably be there for like long term, like for your undergraduate. Like, you're not necessarily locked in, but like, keep in mind that's kind of an implicit expectation when you do have that conversation.
I have to agree with Keegan as well. Before you have that conversation, make sure you want to stay there. Things change over time. You don't always have to obligate, like, just say like, oh, say I'm like a sophomore and I'm starting to get paid, and then all of a sudden something happens and you hate it. Like, you can still leave the lab. But it signals to the PI that you want to stay there, you want to contribute to the research seriously. And so just make sure you have all of that, but also like show your work and say like how you've been contributing to the lab already, to bring in the proof and say this is like kind of why I deserve to be funded. Always build up a case for yourself as well.
Mm-hmm.
I would just build on that too, that if you're in a lab part-time and you're also doing a part-time job to help fund things, that you can kind of sell the funding by saying, I can dedicate more time and effort if I don't have to work this other part-time job. If there's a funding option for this position, then I can go from maybe 10 hours to 15 hours a week and can contribute even more to that. But again, as Hailey and Keegan said, this is all from a place where you have positively contributed to your PI's work. And that's another thing I would emphasize, that for funding, you need to be working on their work, right? Not necessarily your individual project. Some of them will fund you for that, but very often, funding mechanisms are very much tied to the project that they're working on. So that's another thing to consider as well.
And a few more questions, sorry.
No, this is great.
Yeah,
It's wonderful.
you're fine. This is great. Yeah.
So the first one is, do you have any tips for applying for RUs? Should we, when we apply, should we focus more on the previous research we've done, or should we focus more on our interest in a certain topic?
I would focus more on your interest in a certain topic. Oftentimes, REUs have a specific field or topic in mind, and they're wanting to see that you're like engaged with that topic. But you certainly shouldn't like sell yourself short and not include previous research experience. Like, I would frame it as like, here's what I would love to do if I did get this REU, and here's the proof that I could accomplish that.
I have to agree. Like, definitely talk and put an emphasis more on, you know, what you want to do and like why you want to like focus on that and stuff. But also, like, however, some people do have research experience prior to getting RU, and some people don't. So, you know, if you have it, put it in there, throw it in there, emphasize that this is what I've done, and like this is how you want to extend upon it. But also, like, if you have absolutely none, don't worry about it. There are people who walk in from all different walks of life. So
Yeah, I would expand on that for just to emphasize that the federal money is given to these organizations or these schools to create better scientists and more scientists. They've looked at the statistics and they see this giant gap of students that they need to have in the pipeline that aren't there yet, you know, that are staying in science. And so these programs are really there to help, you know, keep you in STEM, right? And to keep you in the pipeline so that you can go on to become a great scientist. And so even if you have no experience, they're designed to help give you that experience. And so a lot of the ones we have here at UAB and others all across the nation are absolutely intended to accept students without experience. And so, yeah, I think emphasizing, you know, future goals and just also just skill sets that are valuable in any kind of research experience. So time management, you know, getting good letters of recommendation of people who could talk about your dedication and your passion, you know, being just mindful and being a very good student. I mean, or coming to workshops like this. I have written letters for several students of recommendation for REUs based off of them coming to a series of workshops and asking very good questions and taking advantage of opportunities. Even things like that, you can highlight that, you know, you've interacted and networked with a great group of graduate students and postdocs through this workshop series. There's all sorts of ways to you know, better your chances with these REUs. So yeah, that's something I just like to always talk about. All right, I know you have more questions, to keep them coming.
Yeah, the next one is, if you are accepted into an REU, how should you make the most of your experience? Like, what's the best way to make sure you're getting the most out of it?
do everything. Do everything. That's honestly the best way. Like, you know, just be an active and supporting member in the lab, but also the REU programs and stuff. Do like outside activities. Though sometimes like you'll have to take a class with it, go to class, go learn in the class. They also have fun activities. Like I didn't specifically do like an REU, but I did like it was like a privately funded one. And they were like, oh, we're having a board game night for like a couple hours. Go to the board game night. Go make friends. Go make those connections. That's honestly the best way you can do it. And then, you know, talk to your professors, talk to the other professors you come across. Because like these people are like, especially if you apply for an REU and you want to go to that school to do research, it's really excellent for you because they could sit on the admissions board. They're like, oh, we recognize this person. Or if you need like another letter of rec, like my summer REU was one of my letter of rec writers for graduate school. And it's like I needed a third. I didn't know who to go to because I had only done research at my school. So just doing that, it allowed me to get that third letter of rec that I needed, but also make another connection, another person keep updated on, another person talk research about, mentor with and stuff.
Yeah, great answer. Go to the workshops, make friends. That's what it's there for.
Can I just say I didn't pay either of these people to say those things, because I do social programming for all of our programs here in the summer. And so like I'm a movie guy, so I do movie and food nights back before the pandemic, where we'd have a movie from a different country and then have the food of that country. It was a great way to network and get to know people from all over the country. You know, I always tell people that science, it may seem like it's a big world, but it's actually a very small world as well when it comes to, because these are your colleagues, these are your future colleagues out there in the world, and you never know when you might run across someone that you even had a summer program with, and they're gonna be like, oh, I remember that, we went saw that cool movie and we ate that food and then we presented at the expo, and you know, we bonded through our misery of trying to talk to a judge who was miserable. Anyway, but I can't say enough how happy I am to hear that emphasis, because I'm always trying to get students to come to our summer programming, our social events, even our scavenger hunt of getting to know what UAB is like. Because yeah, we see them absolutely as recruiting tools for our schools. I have that discussion with programmers all the time. And it's a great way to test out a school, as Hailey said. I mean, you'll have a leg or foot in the door with someone who already knows you, and you get to see if that's a school that you really like, you know. See if you want to put up with the humidity down here in Birmingham in the summer, or if the cold in Minnesota or whatever, you know. So summer programs can give you so many different things, and just help really define what you want to do in so many ways. So yeah, great questions, Needle. What else you got?
This is my last question. I know that oftentimes when you guys have provided a lot of resources for like how to get funded and where to find it, but when we get started, there's a lot of confusion about how we should go about it. How would you suggest we should start, or where do you think we should start our search for funding?
Yeah, so it really comes down to types of funding, right? So like we have summer research opportunities and we have conference grants, and these things have very obvious outcomes. If you have a summer free and if you are in a lab, you can coordinate with your mentor as to whether like some summer programs will be on site. So you could stay in that lab. You could see if your mentor would be okay with you leaving for the summer. Always be talking to your mentor about conferences, regardless of if you get like a grant or a funding for a conference, because they might still just send you to one anyways. But just like start simple with stuff like that that's self-contained, and then you can look for more broad ones that apply to you, just like based on your major, based on the fact that you're an undergrad, if you're in a diversity category, anything like that that you can apply for. Really, it's one of those things, kind of like scholarships for like when you got into undergrad, like it doesn't hurt to apply. And I know it's like not the most fun answer, it's not the secret sauce, but it's really just apply to the ones that you think would serve you well. And it's kind of a shotgun method, but it works.
And then organize them all by due date.
Yeah.
Yeah, keep a spreadsheet. And also, I mean, we've tried to do better with our website to have everything on one page. And after this presentation, I'm going to add a funding opportunities tab to ours. But we have a pretty good tab of, you know, where to find research opportunities, where to do summer research opportunities, where to do publication, where to present. And so we're going to add a tab after this conversation based off of that wonderful slide that Keegan showed, to just kind of list the funding opportunities, not just here at UAB, but nationally, that you can investigate. So hopefully we're going to get our website to be kind of a one-stop shop starting point for some of these things. But Keegan and Hailey are absolutely right. I mean, that's just a starting point, and that you really have to kind of organize that in a way that is productive for you, so that, you know, when due dates are, you know, what things you need for that, those applications, whether they're letters of rec, personal statements, all those sorts of things. I always tell students when they're looking at the summer programs, yeah, to create a nice little spreadsheet with all of those things, because it's easy to miss some of these things and to also conflate them, and, you know, get the wrong, you know, submit the wrong type of personal statement, to the wrong program. You want to make sure it's organized in a way that you're getting the right things to the right things. So that's really important.
One last thing on that, because I'd feel bad just leaving you with that advice, is like, do make sure to prioritize. Like, there's an infinite amount of funding opportunities, and there always will be more that you could have applied for. So really, just if you have a mentor, you can see if they have any recommendations, but also just like be mindful of your limits and apply for ones that look like they pertain to you, pertain to your research interests. Like, don't spread yourself too thin, and like, you're not going to apply to every single opportunity, and that's okay. Like, it wouldn't be worth it anyways. Like, just apply to the ones that pertain to you, and don't feel bad about it.
I also want to add just one other great resource we have here is the fellowships office. You started talking at the start about fellowships and scholarships, and we kind of have we kind of see it as like a baton relay with our office and with their office, that students start in our office and they get the experience, so then they can apply for these really cool fellowships and scholarships. Some of them are definitely still while you're an undergraduate, like the Goldwater Scholarship. But others are post graduation opportunities. Some of them are funding for graduate school, like a Fulbright. But there are a whole variety of them, and the wonderful Dr. Michelle Cook in the UAB Fellowships Office is someone that I will gladly hand you off to learn about these additional ways to get funding, because that's what really all those fellowships and scholarships are, is ways to pay for your education. But it's always good, again, from a starting point, is the experiences that you get in service learning, undergraduate research, education abroad, internships, all of those things help you then get funding for these other opportunities. So, you know, and money begets money is another thing I always say, that once you get someone to give you money and you put it on the CV, someone says, oh, someone else gave them money, I should give them money. That you get kind of a snowball effect sometimes with those things. And so even applying for smaller things can lead to bigger things. So like the travel grant for a conference, for example, is a very small stage or small step that can lead to so much more. And I'll give you a great example where we had students who presented at our expo. Then they went to the National Conference of Undergraduate Research to present. And then they went to present at the World Congress of Undergraduate Research in Germany, and they won prizes there. We had one student who won, I think, $1,500. So nothing to sneeze about. That's some good money. But if they hadn't started at the very start by presenting at the expo, and taking those steps up to it, and then of course after they've presented at that World Congress, then they can use that as a way to get to the Fulbright. In fact, 2 of the students that went with me went on to get Fulbright scholarships based off of their presentation at Germany. So there's just one example of that.
Thank you. Those were all my questions.
All right. Thanks
for
so
the questions.
much. Keegan, Hailey, any last words of advice or anything else that you want to share at this moment? If not, I want to thank you for a great presentation. Lots of very specific, concise information that I think our students here at UAB will greatly benefit from. And as I said, it's influenced me to look at my own website and say, oh my goodness, I need to add all that great stuff that y'all listed there, so that students can have a one-stop shop to kind of find some of that funding. So, so thank you so much for providing that and taking the time to present today.